Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending where you are in the world. And thank you for joining us today for this live webinar series, Social License, Can the Next Generation Drive Trust? This is the second of a three-part series exploring the critical issues shaping the next generation of the seafood industry. My name is Michelle Franze, and I am the Communications Manager for the BC Salmon Farmers Association, Chair and Co-founder of the Young Salmon Farmers of BC, and board member and co-founder of the Next Generation Seafood Alliance. Today, I'm joined by some excellent panelists, and I look forward to today's discussion. Before we dive in, I just wanted to extend a thank you to today's sponsor, Imperial 75 by Cargill, as well as Aquaculture North America and my fellow Next Generation Seafood Alliance members for hosting this informative series. First, a few notes on housekeeping. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you need to leave early or you miss any part of the presentation, a link of the recording will be emailed to all registrants afterwards. Secondly, the audience is in listening mode only, so cameras and microphones will be turned off for you and the raise hand function will be deactivated. However, the chat and Q&A functions are open to you. We ask that any questions you may have be submitted in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of our panel discussion. The chat will be open to you to share comments and contribute to the conversation with attendees. These functions, again, should be at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, but if you do not see them, then they're likely under that More button at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, there is a post-webinar survey that will pop up following the conclusion of this webinar, and a link will also be emailed to you. If you can, please take 5 minutes to complete it. It's a very short survey, and we would greatly appreciate the feedback so we can ensure we improve for next time. The structure of today's session will be a quick presentation by myself introducing the topic, followed by a panel discussion with our amazing guests, and then finally the floor will be open to audience questions. Before we jump into the first section of today's webinar, we just have a quick word from our sponsor.
Cargill Branded Feed is proud to sponsor this series of webinars. Our foundational protein for premium salmon diets, Imperial 75, is a highly digestible, high-protein concentrate delivering performance without compromise. That innovation has since evolved into a global solution for other marine diets. Motive, developed exclusively for shrimp, is a functional macro ingredient that helps stabilize gut pH to promote growth and support disease resistance. Learn more at cargillbrandedfeed.com.
Perfect. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation, just introducing today's topic and what we will be discussing. So again, the topic of today is social license. Can the next generation drive trust? Next slide, please. So why is this something that we're relevant to talking about today? Social license has become quite the defining issues in culture globally. We are seeing a rise of activism that we've seen over the past few decades. And the activism and misinformation that is spreading across the sector is, as we are seeing in different regions of the world, impacting policy decisions and regulatory decisions of the aquaculture sector, and particularly salmon farming. What we are seeing with the use of social media and more platforms coming forward is the spread of misinformation spreads quicker than science or factual information. So it's very important that the seafood sector, aquaculture sector, takes the time and puts in the investment to address social license and build their public trust. In terms of why we need the public trust and why do we need social license, it's important in terms of the growing demand for seafood. More than half of the seafood consumed globally already is farmed. And if you look at the graph on the screen there, this is from the UN FAO. Wild catch can no longer meet the growing demand that we're going to have. We are expected to reach about 9.7 billion by 2050. So aquaculture is going to help offset that demand, and we need to be raising more seafood and more sustainable food in general. Next slide, please. So what is social license? So this is something that we would like to define before we get into the topic of conversation. Different people have their different definitions of it. But for today, we are going to define social license as an informal contract. So this is something between the public and private organizations and government, and it begins with public acceptance or public trust. When you're looking at gaining public trust, it's how does your sector or your company have, what kind of reputation do you have? And when you look at your reputation, performance and behavior of an organization is something that is key when it comes to building that reputation. So you really want to be focusing on those two things. Those two things need to be in place, and then your communications can help amplify that the stuff that you're doing. If you aren't focusing on your performance and behavior as an organization or a sector, then your communications alone is not going to build public trust. Public trust is built on many different things. It's built on a company being transparent and taking accountability, being open and honest, being a part of the community in which they operate in, as well as continuously focusing on improving their environmental performance and striving to innovate and consistently do better. As well as cultural respect for the community that they're in. I know in particularly British Columbia, where our sector is located, every farm has an agreement with First Nations, and ensuring that part of our agreements is respecting the culture of the First Nations where we operate. Social license and public trust in general, that's something that takes time to earn. It is not something that you will gain overnight. It won't happen in a day or a week or even a year. It takes multiple years for a sector or an organization to achieve it. But keep in mind that it could take 5 minutes for all that to come crashing down. So it's an investment that everybody should be making regularly and focusing on as part of their cost of doing business. Okay, next slide, please. So why does social license matter? Again, as I said, in the digital age that we are in, misinformation is spreading faster than the facts can keep up with. And when we look at the younger generation, which is the generation that are going to be our next decision makers, they are the ones that are predominantly online and retaining all this information that we're seeing. They want to see greater accountability from industries. They want to see more authentic communication. They don't really want to see that highly polished, edited, very corporate style communications. They want to see people's real experiences. They want to see what it's like on the ground for the employees, for the communities, and really what you're doing as a sector to engage with the community. And having that transparency, taking accountability, like I said earlier, and not trying to hide things. So just really being open and honest with the community and your online audience. If you can't obtain or maintain your social license, and again, we'll talk about an example of this, you're going to see your policy risks increase. And with that, you're going to see an unstable investment because you're not going to have your investors wanting to invest in a sector or a business where there's not that long-term security. And ultimately, that lack of investment will halt innovation. And as a result of that, you're going to see less retention in your skilled workforce. You're not going to be able to attract as many skilled workers, and it's just going to become much more difficult to operate. Next slide, please. So today we're going to be talking about a case study, and that is British Columbia, something myself and one of our panelists, Brian, knows very well. In British Columbia, it's definitely become a global example of politics influencing policy and how quickly your operating certainty can change. BC is something that's being watched very closely globally from all other regions that are producing salmon. And the real question for us today is this an isolated issue to British Columbia, or is this something that is a warning to other regions that if this is not something that we take seriously and invest in long term, that this is going to spread to other regions around the world? Next slide, please. So I want to leave the slides off today and start our panel discussion with a thought-provoking quote. So the quote today is, "Pressure is a privilege." And while it may not feel that way for those who are in regions of the world of aquaculture where you're experiencing high activism, you're experiencing these policy decisions being made based off of misinformation, it can often feel like you're consistently putting out fires and it doesn't feel like a privilege. But I want to challenge people to think about this as a potential opportunity. Why is this something that should be seen as a privilege? If you're under the microscope, if you're constantly battling scrutiny, it's because you matter. And aquaculture is growing in its importance more and more every day. Like I said, aquaculture is providing more than half of the seafood consumed globally. It's becoming an important part of food security globally, and it's a major economic driver in a lot of communities. So it's understandable that it's going to be highly scrutinized. It's going to be followed very closely. But ultimately, when you're under a lot of pressure, it forces you to innovate very quickly, and it forces you to address where you potentially might have some gaps, where you can grow and improve. And that's something that the aquaculture sector has done very, very well over the past few decades. Is it's grown rapidly and it's innovated more rapidly than it would have if it didn't have all of this scrutiny that it was under. So that's something that I think we can take as a positive. And ultimately, it makes better leaders. It builds up that next generation to be stronger in the workforce. The experience that young professionals are gaining in this highly pressurized industry is gaining them more experience and better skill sets than they would in the same positions in other types of sectors. So I think ultimately it's going to be building a very much more robust workforce as well. So now that we have that background information to set the stage, let's get into the main event and hear from some of our wonderful guests. So first, I'm going to introduce our panelists. And as I introduce them, they will be turning on their cameras so you can see them. So first, we have Brian Kingzett. Brian is the executive director of the BC Salmon Farmers Association. During Brian's 40 years of experience in the aquaculture field, his career has specialized in bringing together interdisciplinary combinations of business development, sound science, responsible aquaculture production practices, strategic market-based development approaches, and working with Indigenous and stakeholder groups. Brian has worked in government, research, academia, consulting, and the private sector. Katelyn Harris. Katelyn Harris is the Atlantic Canada Fish Farmers Association's Community Outreach and Education Coordinator. She educates people about Atlantic Canada's finfish farming sector by leading ACFFA's community outreach and education programs, including the K-12 learning opportunities, career promotion activities, and efforts that build meaningful connections across the agricultural sector and community organizations. James Sibley. James Sibley is a content creator and communicator in global aquaculture. One of the world's most recognized voices in aquaculture, James reaches over 500,000 engaged followers globally and millions of viewers each month. His work translates complex farming systems, sustainability challenges, and technological innovation into clear, credible narratives for both the public and professional audiences. Joana Mendes. Joana works in the Tasmanian aquaculture industry and brings over 10 years of experience across production, sustainability, and community engagement. She currently serves as an environmental, social, and governance and communities partner, helping shape responsible practices and meaningful connections within the seafood sector. A recent Nuffield scholar, Joana traveled globally to explore innovative approaches to sustainable salmon farming with a particular focus on strategies that strengthen the relationship between farming, communities, and the ecosystem. As you can see, we have a very highly educated and experienced group of panelists today whose insights are going to be really valuable in today's discussion. So let's dive in. So I'm going to start with the first section of today's questions, focusing on where we are currently when it comes to social license in the sector and how we got here. So I'm going to start with Brian, who's our seasoned panelist, who's been in the sector for 40 years. Brian, how has the concept of social license or just building public trust evolved during your career? And when did you first feel it became a defining issue rather than just a background concern?
Thanks, Michelle. And starting with the technical issue. Thanks, Michelle. I feel like the old generation here. That's my hitting the wrong buttons. So I think that largely, and I'm generalizing here, is that the sector, especially here in British Columbia, which I'll refer to, believed that if we had our science, if that was sound, and if we received our licenses from the provincial and federal governments, and later if we had agreements with the local Indigenous governments, that we had all the permissions of the social license we needed, and that has changed. And I think it came as a bit of a surprise. It didn't happen all at once. While it's been acknowledged that the sector needed to consider public sentiment, I think we typically thought that logic would win the day, and that's not a winning strategy, to be honest, especially in this short, as you mentioned, short soundbite social media world. Earning public trust has really become critical and perhaps harder at the same time.
Definitely. There's a lot of noise that people have to address and work through. In terms of historically and the activism that the industry has experienced, do you think there was definitely, looking back, some early warning signs that the industry may have underestimated?
Oh, absolutely. In British Columbia, this goes back a long way, with professional activists driving a wedge between the farm salmon industry in its sort of nascent beginning and wild salmon production. Originally with significant backing from US donors. This reached a peak in 2012, and we had the Cohen Commission looking into that was convened in response to poor sockeye returns in British Columbia. And salmon farming was held up as a prime suspect in those decreased runs. This was the most expensive judicial commission in Commonwealth history at the time. And ironically, this was the same year that the largest sockeye runs in a century occurred.
Wow. Now, in terms of industry responding to these early warning signs and what we were seeing kind of growing in terms of scrutiny, do you think the industry was proactive or has been more proactive, or has it been primarily reactive historically?
I think historically the sector has always been reactive. To sort of build on my previous point, I think there's always been a focus on the science. But what we've learned, and believing that was all we needed. But what we've learned, and perhaps the hard way, is that while the science needs to be in order and it needs to be sound, it's very easy for opponents of the sector to weaponize, alternate science, and create doubt. And that's really all you need to do. And this continually puts the sector on the back foot and chasing the issue. And that's really sort of driven a lot of the discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to switch over to Katelyn Harris, because you work directly with the community. You're often in classrooms and at community events, so you're engaging with people face to face quite often. You also founded the Society of Emerging Aquaculturists on the east coast of Canada. From what you've experienced in your perspective, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that you encounter when it comes to aquaculture? And do you think the younger generations are more skeptical, or do you think they're more open to learning about it?
I'll answer the second part of the question first and then go to the first one. So when I go into the public or classrooms, I actually have a survey that I have students or the public fill out. So 90% of the students that I surveyed have no knowledge of aquaculture or little knowledge of aquaculture. I don't think they're skeptical of aquaculture. I think they have no exposure to aquaculture. I find the youth are open-minded, so it's easy to give them the facts and they, digest that. I feel the youth is more or less like a clean slate for educating. So I find the most common misconceptions actually come from the older generation. And I do find that the older generation, I get asked a lot, like the two main questions will be, do we dye our salmon, and what's underneath of a sea cage? So those questions can be answered fairly easily with like today's technology that's out there. So we have videos of what's underneath of a sea cage, so it's easy to show the public what's going on there. Things like James is doing, he's showing what's going on underneath these cages as well. So like that's a really good resource for us to use as well. As for the dyeing question, I'm honest with them. I say it's an antioxidant. We have to add it to the diet to help with their overall health, and they seem to, understand and receive that information really well. It's just that they've been exposed to the negative information and not been exposed to the positive information, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I know the Young Salmon Farmers of BC, we often also do presentations virtually to classrooms. And you can see that, like, you learn about different types of farming in the classroom growing up, but aquaculture is not something that you learn about. It's not part of the curriculum. So it's very understandable why people would think they would have those skeptical misperceptions, because that's what they're primarily seeing online. In terms of your engagement with people in the community, and when you're addressing these misconceptions, what do you find are actual tangible actions that really do change people's minds when you're talking with them, besides just the videos that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think who we put in front of the public to explain what aquaculture is really important as well. My background, I've worked in aquaculture at a hatchery, so when I go into these public spaces, I can talk from real life experience of what I've seen, what I've done, and I think they respect that a little bit more as opposed to someone who's studied it and has looked at it from the outside kind of thing. So I think that having people that work literally in the industry be the front face to the public and can give their perceptions and their life experience and what they've seen is really important, because I think aquaculturists, or fish farmers in general, we're really passionate about what we do. We really think it's important and we really love the ocean. And I think if we can get in front of the public and explain that and they see how passionate we are about it, I think the tides will turn, so to speak.
No, and I totally agree with you there. I'm going to switch over to Joana. You sit at the intersection of ESG, communities, and corporate accountability. From an ESG standpoint, is social license more about perception or performance in your opinion? I know I addressed this a little bit in the slides. And what metrics actually matter in your opinion when you're trying to build trust?
Well, it's both. From an ESG perspective, a strong performance should, in theory, lead to a positive perception. But really, the reality is, like, a single environmental incident can really overshadow years of good work and distort how the industry is viewed. So I think that's why social license can't just be about ESG metrics alone. There's definitely deeper elements of credibility, legitimacy, trust that support the industry in a wholesome way. So you said, did you ask me the second question? What was the second question again?
What the metrics? Yeah.
Okay. So I think trust is not necessarily about metrics, but people. Again, people build trust through relationships, shared values, and meaningful conversations, none of which fit neatly into a spreadsheet. So really, another way to look at it is, like, if we can translate our ESG performance into human stories, where a farmer can really explain what they do, why they do it, and how science supports it, that message is really often far more credible than a corporate report. And I do also think, I just want to add that to build trust, science communicators play a really important role in delivering this message, because two things. One, we have really complex data sets, and this needs to be turned into digestible content for communities and stakeholders to understand it. And also, people trust science, not just industry alone. So to answer your question, ESG metrics matter, but we really need to have the right people communicating it to build that trust.
I totally agree with you there. Especially in the era of people wanting more authentic communication and content, just spitting facts at people is not enough. You definitely have to have people building trust and being authentic in the way that they're communicating it. James, in terms of authentic communications, you've kind of really honed that skill, I think, on social media and your content creation. You've worked globally as a content creator and an educator. How has digital media really reshaped the social license challenge for aquaculture?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I don't know the time before social media in the aquaculture world, right? I got into this 5 or 6 years ago. So this battle has been going on since I first learned that fish could be farmed. The way that I see it is digital media has really redefined a lot of agriculture. It's decentralized a lot of the conversations, and it's quickened those conversations, right? So it's no longer waiting on those quarterly reports, and then maybe some local news outlet will pick it up and write a magazine article about it. This stuff happens by the hour. We see that a lot in BC. We see it a lot in Tasmania right now. Scotland, it's on and off as well, all with salmon farming, right? It makes things far, far more challenging for the farmers, in my opinion. From those I speak to, it is frustrating to see the same image get recycled for 5 years every 48 hours with the same effect, right? Thousands and thousands of viewers on this. And that's often their first impression of aquaculture is, maybe like a moribund fish or, an overcrowded shrimp farm. I even see some content, especially in Maine, against things like mussels and oysters, which many of us in the aquaculture world view as kind of the poster child for social license. So the issue is prevalent everywhere in different ways, in different forms. That being said, right, it opens the door and the opportunity for the farmers to really jump on this bandwagon too. I see great examples of this around the world with some farmers honestly making social media an integral piece of their entire operation, right? They are a fish farmer, or in some cases hatcheries or service, but they're also a media company, right? I like to speak through examples that I've seen. One was Smoking Chimneys. They're a trout farmer in the US. If you look them up on Instagram, you'll find them, right? And they have hundreds of millions of views on their content about what they do every day. And they've put a person behind it. So when they have issues that come up, and biological problems, environmental issues, right? This is agriculture, things happen. People turn to them first, not last.
That's a really good point. I know in BC, and I'm assuming probably other regions of the world, communications is kind of a newer department for a lot of companies. It's not something they've really focused on in a serious way. And with the rise of social media, it's become more and more important. So in terms of the overall communications almost battle that's happening between industry and activism, do you think the industry is losing this battle, or do you think we're kind of doing a better job at that?
Yeah, aquaculture is global and fractured, and that applies here as well with social media, communications, and social licensing. One of the issues I see, in my opinion, of course, this is my 2 cents on it, but the NIMBYism that we hate so much, right, when it comes to our farms and licenses, I also see that on sort of the global aquaculture stage with the farmers themselves, right? Those in regions of the world where they're not facing a lot of backlash want nothing to do with the regions of the world where the farms are having serious problems with the public, and that is not sustainable, right? That is not going to last. I just came back from another example here, the Falklands, where they don't have farms, right? There's not a single aquaculture facility there that's active. They want to, but they're having a really hard time because the world has kind of imported activism there ahead of time. They've had speakers coming in from Tasmania, from Scotland, from Canada, I believe, as well, into a region of the world to prevent this from even happening, right? So they're getting ahead of it in that regard, and that's not unique, right? So I think that there would be a lot of benefit to be had if aquaculture kind of came together on this in a global front and really tried to communicate at breadth with the resources that they have.
I couldn't agree more. I can definitely get what you're saying, where when something happens in one region of the world, another region's like, oh, I'm not touching that one. You guys can handle that. So I think a more united approach is definitely needed. I'm going to switch over into segment 2 here, which is looking to other industries. I think there's a lot to learn from other types of industries who have maybe experienced the same type of misinformation or activism or had a bit of a challenge building social license. So I'll start with you, Joana, just because you've traveled for your Nuffield Scholar, you were exposed to other types of sectors. Which industries, from your perspective, are managing social license particularly well? And what is aquaculture failing to adopt from them, or just maybe salmon farming in general, if that's more your expertise?
Yeah, I get asked this question quite a lot. So short answer is there's no perfect industry. But I did get a lot of exposure to agriculture, and this industry has faced social license issues for generations. So I just got two examples that I'd like to share. One is when I was in Germany, I visited a poultry farm that had literally cut out a window into the side of their barn so people could just come up and see the level of intensification in husbandry inside. So it was a really bold move, I thought, but it really paid out because they used it strategically to place a lot of educational content around it. And really the point here is that their level of transparency really shows that they have nothing to hide. Come and see. Another one, it's a little bit different. So it's more about farmers changing their mindset. So they went from how do I produce more to how do I produce well? And this is a mixed crop farmer in Scotland that changed a small part of his land to include a biodiversity hub. So planting flowers, turning to attract pollinators, so then it benefits their crops and so on. So this farmer knows that improving the landscape that he farms in, and even if that means giving up some of their productive land, will improve his production in the long run. And I think this mindset shift here is really amazing because it's focusing on the whole ecosystem, not just on the product. And for us in aquaculture, we are farming in a depleting environment, our oceans. And from a social license perspective, we will continue to be blamed for this depletion, even though we can demonstrate really well that we have really good compliance. So my challenge here, I guess, to the industry is, can we take this example from the Scottish farmer and really adapt it in our ways of farming and demonstrate that we can have a positive impact? Yeah.
That's interesting. I love the idea of the window and the chicken coop for
yes,
farming.
love it.
Yeah. Do you think overall the sector has been kind of ignorant, would you say, to learning experiences outside of itself? Or is it more just it's been so consumed by what's going on internally that it's hard to kind of see outside of your own sector?
No, aquaculture is definitely not ignorant. The industry is like fast evolving. Like we have 40 years, of advancement in technology, super significant and really noticeable. We uptake, we learn so quickly, but we have been siloed. I do think our own industry can learn so much more from the challenges that agriculture has had. And really, if we collaborate more, we can just really come out as a strong voice because we're all food producers. So, yeah.
I totally agree. And traditional ag's been around for much, much longer than aquaculture. So definitely some lessons to be learned there. Yeah. Brian, I'm going to switch over to you as someone who's been exposed to quite a lot of different types of work experiences and just different industries. Do you think aquaculture has resisted cross-industry learning? And what industries are facing similar activism, in your opinion, and have done a great job at handling it?
Okay, a couple of questions. Yeah, so I agree with Joanna. I don't think the aquaculture industry has resisted per se, but I have been reflecting lately on the fact that often the regulatory aspect of aquaculture is it separates us from terrestrial agriculture, and that doesn't help. And I think here in BC and in Canada as a whole, we've had a lot more involvement with, as I call the water farmers, with the dirt farmers, and and learning from those organizations is certainly helped in the learning process, because ultimately all farmers are farmers. As for similar activism and who survived it, Joanna mentioned poultry, which has had I think a tough time, but I think there are some sectors that have, and poultry's done a good job. I think there's some sectors that have done a better job. Dairy, for example, is always sort of really invested heavily in the role of farmers and sort of the romanticism of the dairy herd. Here in Canada, the Canadian Cattle Association has done a very good job with their sort of stewards of the grasslands approach. But overall, and I think of a recent quote from Daniel Sinnott at the BC Agriculture Council, which recently expressed it as, public trust is not a campaign, is continually sort of adding coins to a piggy bank. So that the public knows the truth, and when something breaks, and as James sort of mentioned, or Joanna said, there's always something that happens. But when a bad story breaks, the public will know the truth, and I think I completely agree with that. This is, it's not something you can be reactive to. You need to be building for that all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with the dairy farmers too. Every time someone brings up dairy farmers, I just remember being in elementary school and there's just the posters with celebrities and it's the got milk and they have a milk mustache and they have a milk program in the schools and they've just been really, really done a good job at integrating themselves with people at such a young age. In terms of differences and what we're seeing from other sectors, do you think there are certain things that make aquaculture a little bit more vulnerable to the scrutiny and misinformation, or is it pretty similar across sectors? We just are it's just our time to deal with it.
Well, first of all, I think I think we have been more vulnerable. I know this is a next generation group, but 40 years in salmon farming is still seen by a lot of people as a new industry. And so it has less public understanding and it makes it easy prey for activism campaigns, and as the industry has learned, mistakes made in an emerging industry, they're easier to use as fodder. That picture that James sort of referred to, or pictures that are used over and over again. And so, what I see is no credit given to how fast the sector is evolving or where we are now, and a lot of the litigation of issues is things that happened a long time ago. Equally important, I think, is that unlike the chicken farm where you can look into it, is that the sector is largely in remote areas and out of sight, and that makes it very prone to myth building. Terrestrial agriculture has a base public understanding that's largely positive. And even though it's sort of relatively inaccurate in modern high-tech farming, we all grow up with this, whatever our country's image is, of a red barn and a trusted farmer standing there with his pitchfork, in coveralls. And we can visit and experience terrestrial farms more easily. They're part of the landscape. And so that has helped, along with that long history, I think, in helping the terrestrial side, but making us also much more vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree. And I think not a lot of people know that a lot of companies that have salmon farms are more than happy to host tours and happy to have people come and see what they do. But the challenge is trying to get people to the farms because they're so remote. Katelyn, I'm going to switch to you just because you, as a young leader yourself, you've founded a new young leader network. You work with a lot of different young leaders. And young leaders often move between industries and networks. How can young professionals facilitate collaboration between sectors like agriculture and forestry, energy and aquaculture, or just other types of resource sectors in general?
Thanks, Michelle. I do see young professionals, they're really eager to interact with their peers. I think they need more opportunities to do so. I will always suggest there's no harm in asking. So if you are, employed with said employer and there's a conference or a networking opportunity coming up, ask if you can go. The worst that can happen is they'll deny you, but at least then they'll know you're interested in that opportunity as well. So first, make your intentions known if you want to start doing networking and opportunistic things of that nature. I do think that collaborating with other industries is important. However, I do think there's still a lot of collaboration that can happen within our own sector. So we are starting like this youth aquaculture group on the East Coast. You have a youth aquaculture group on the West Coast, and they're popping up globally. I think it's really important for us as an industry to learn from, like Joana was saying, like the scientists, to digest that information, to have regulators in on those groups, to have your farmers in on those groups, so everyone can kind of communicate, share ideas and kind of see where everyone's coming from. So I do believe in collaboration with other industries. I also believe that there could be more work in collaborating within our own industry within itself. So that's kind of where I am with that. And on that note as well, I think our industry is really receptive and open and just really nice. Like, I've met Joana when she came to visit the ACFFA office when there was an anti-salmon farming AI website that came out. I messaged James on a social media platform. He responded, fairly quickly. And we had a conversation about what the industry maybe could do for that. And then I get a lot of information from you too, Michelle, about the youth groups that we are, co-coordinating and things like that. So I believe if we could collaborate together more within our own industry too, we will lift it up higher and more quickly than like kind of go into other industries, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think that's a really good point to raise. I know even within our young professional group, it's been really nice to just have different people who work in different areas of the sector. And if you have a question, you can easily just send them a text or give them a call and ask it. And when you're doing presentations, then the person whose expertise that is can very easily answer those questions. And you're not having to go back and find out the answer and then come back to them. And it brings a more authentic response as well. So I think that's a really good point. James, I'm going to switch to you. Storytelling is a powerful communications tool and one that I think we could do more of and one that you've done a really good job with. In your opinion, what industries have really been able to gain public trust through their storytelling? And what do you think that they did differently that aquaculture hasn't necessarily adopted as well yet?
Good question. So there's the obvious ones that we've seen a bit of a resurgence in their popularity, nuclear, the space race is back on, all sorts of things like that. I'd like to point it to a specific one, conventional agriculture in the UK, right? It was in decline for decades, if not centuries. In many parts, it still remains that way. And there was one moment that has actually started to turn things around, which is why I want to point to it. If anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm with Jeremy Clarkson, no matter your thoughts on him, he's a funny guy and he's great on camera and he has a team that's been doing this for decades. And in a couple seasons, a couple of years, he has sort of rewritten the British farming narrative, right? From a sort of dead and bygone industry that was polluting and sort of destroying the environment to something that should be supported because it's in their heritage and the importance of food sovereignty there, to the point where they're in the midst of overturning the inheritance tax that was about to be imposed on them, right? And that wasn't an overnight process, right? And it was heavily resourced to build that series up to what it is. It's still going, I think 5 years later here, but effectively, right? It was one campaign that changed the outlook on farming in Britain, largely because at the end of season one, after the whole thing, right, a year's worth of farming and all the trials and tribulations, he pulls up his sort of whiteboard spreadsheet on the wall, does the math and realizes, wow, I lost 150 quid this year. That was, so it was just really sort of the trials and the struggles of farmers, conventional farmers, right? He's dabbled in regenerative ag and rewilding efforts. He's very candid about how most of what he's doing is conventional farming, the use of pesticides and herbicides as needed, what most of the world is doing in ag. And I think that's a really important story for aquaculture because there's similarities there that can be drawn on, right? It was a quick turnaround. It was sort of brought together by one team. And it really has reshaped how British farmers can talk with the British public.
I think that's a great example. And that kind of brings another question about different types of champions or spokespeople. In your opinion, who do you think are the most powerful types of champions that the aquaculture sector could have in terms of different communications voices? Is it scientists, farmers themselves, using content creators like yourselves, or is it a mix of different voices?
Yeah, I think any of those would be relatively ineffective on their own, right? You need everyone together involved in this. Even what I do as an influencer, right? I started out as a scientist and I began the influencer stuff to try and get into farming. Well, that turned out to be continue doing more of the online stuff. But right, I was trying to do everything. I was trying to wear multiple hats there until I realized how big the world of aquaculture is. So I think it's really critical that all of them are involved and that it's a concerted effort, right? They need to be in communications with each other. I always tout that we need more people like me doing what I do. And that doesn't mean people doing this full time. It can be farmers, independent farmers, mom and pops kind of shops that are just talking about what they do day to day, just with a phone. It doesn't need to be a huge production. and just having everybody work together like that. I have many people call me up in the sector who are farmers, or maybe they're small influencers, and they're trying to build something in the aquaculture space here. It's really difficult, right? The aquaculture realm does not lend itself to the digital era well, right? Your filming equipment is always on the ocean. Your drones are in windy fjords. It's usually raining and it's usually very cold. It's not an easy place to film in. So those who are willing to risk it and do it and put their face behind it is another big piece of it. They need to be supported. They need to be put in like a group together, because I'm always finding these people trying to do this on their own. And it is really difficult to start out, right? It took me 3 years to get to a point where I could step away from another full-time job to actually pursue this as is. That is not replicable.
I couldn't agree more. I know that's something that we've also challenged with our young pro group is a lot of people want to be more active online. They want to do that social media stuff, but not necessarily feeling like they have the full support to do that on top of what they're doing for their full-time job. It is a lot to juggle. So I appreciate you kind of raising that and addressing it. I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes before we get into the Q&A using a little bit of a case study for our panelists to discuss, and that's British Columbia. Now, it's still something that's ongoing, but for those of you who may not know, the formal Liberal Canadian government announced in June 2024 that BC would be granted a five-year licensing period for current ocean salmon farms ending in June 30th, 2029. After this date, current ocean pen systems will be banned in BC coastal waters. This decision was announced after federal independent scientists concluded that salmon farms pose no more than a minimal risk to wild Pacific salmon. Additionally, prior to this announcement, various stakeholders, including the industry, submitted documents supporting responsible transition plans, and these plans included frameworks for area-based management, sea lice reduction, advanced technologies, and First Nations collaboration. We do have a new federal government, and there's been no update to date. However, we are hoping for a renewed policy, of course, and for that ban to be lifted. But for today's discussion, we're just going to assume things are being kept as is, just to use as a case study for our panelists to talk about. Brian, we'll start with you because you are very, very deep in this situation. BC has become a global example of politics driving policy. From your perspective, how do you think this happened? And in your opinion, was this a communications failure? Was it unavoidable? Or is there something more to it? Is there something deeper?
Well, thanks, Michelle. First of all, that's not a short answer. It probably requires about 4 rounds of beer in a pub to sort of sort out. In fact, I believe that at some point, some social scientist is going to do a very good PhD thesis on what happened here. To try and make it very short, I think the origins of the BC story have been, really well documented with originally with over $100 million flowing into BC from the United States, originally to fund activist groups to demarket BC salmon, which in the very early days of the salmon sector was seen as that it might be a threat to wild fish coming out of Alaska. This has been combined with, we have, and I'm part of that, a strong environmental ethic in British Columbia that sets the stage for significant activism on the bell ends of that, and across our range of natural resource sectors. Mix in failing, wild salmon stocks, which have no clear cause or solution. So it creates an endless problem, and it's easy to assign, in our case, salmon farming as a scapegoat, and to be a recipe for continual funding of those activist groups. And that has implications for all, that's one of the reasons we don't have a diverse or small aquaculture sector is, the small players, is because we're caught up in this much bigger issue. As to whether it's a communications failure, unavoidable, or something deeper, I'd say all of the above. Hindsight's 2020. I think salmon farmers and aquaculture as a whole, believe they're on the right side of history, from a food security, a biological, and environmental, and a sustainability perspective. Given the pressures that we're seeing as we march on to 10 billion people globally. That does not mean that we are not an easy target for activism, and we need to invest in public trust. And that's sort of, that's the 30-second version of how we got there.
No, I appreciate that. In terms of the the topic of today and social license and building public trust to gain social license, what do you think other regions of the world who produce salmon or have aquaculture facilities, what do you think they can learn most immediately from what you're dealing with in British Columbia?
Well, I see that one of our new exports has become activism. And in this global environment, that moves really fast. And I think, the message for everybody else, and we're seeing this in real time, is that you're not immune. And to go back to my, my earlier analogy is, it's really important to start putting coins in that piggy bank by the time, something happens or some activist, group starts to realize that your jurisdiction is a good target. And we're seeing this in Atlantic Canada right now. You need to have built some trust way ahead of that problem emerging, and don't think that you're immune at all.
Great. Joana, I'm going to switch to you as somebody who lives on the opposite end of British Columbia in the world. How does the BC situation affect global investor confidence and ESG perception?
Okay, I can offer my personal perspective here, just acknowledging that I'm not the ESG investor relations specialist, but as you've mentioned, like the BC situation and the context around it, I think what happened there was driven largely by public pressure and political alignment, really, rather than this scientific evidence or regulatory performance. So at that same time, I think ESG considerations were already becoming central, I think, to investment decisions. And it's just investors are increasingly focused on how industry operate within their ecosystems. So regardless of BC's case, the industry will need to continue to demonstrate ESG metrics, strong ones. And I think what was once ESG competitive advantage, with investment, it's now just becoming a requirement. Yeah.
Now I'm going to start with James here for the next section. How has BC been portrayed internationally, in your opinion, as somebody who started outside of the sector? I know you've had experience working in the sector as well. So how do you think BC is really being portrayed outside of Canada?
Yeah, I've been to salmon farms in almost a dozen countries around the world now, and I'll try and speak through the farmers' eyes and the talks I have with them. I would describe it as a bit of a case study. It's a test, right? Like if BC falls, right, if you lose your open net pens, everyone's, going to be really taken aback and, really double down on what they're doing. And if not, they may think it's the status quo. That's not true across the board, right? That's just kind of how I get a lot of questions about BC, especially because I've been starting to put out a little bit of content from what I've filmed in BC this year about this from other farmers around the world, right? None of these are unique issues to BC. Some of them are heightened because, it's Atlantic salmon on the West Coast. You have a strong wild fishery that's not common in the world in the salmon sector, right? So some of those issues are heightened there, but by and large, these are issues that a lot of places are facing, even those that don't have sea lice, right? Pieces like that are some of the biggest concerns there. Whether or not, that is being controlled effectively, I would say, from my personal experience in working with you guys, you've been doing a very good job on this in the past couple of years here. It's an uphill battle because it would have been great if it had been started a decade earlier. Hindsight's 2020, right? As Brian's been saying here, you want to, bank, pennies in the piggy bank there. But what you can do after the fact here is really, fight fire with fire as best you can. And by that, I don't mean spread misinformation or just, post whatever you can every 30 minutes. No, if you can get people to sit down and watch 30, 45 seconds of something, that does 10 times the impact that one little snippet or graphic might do. And if you can get to them first, right, that is the most important piece. Most people, even in BC, I presume, are still apathetic to the issue, right? So it really is a matter of, perceiving what has been done, where we are. We're sort of the first ones in the world to be facing this at the level that we are, where you might lose the sector. And, I really hope to see it kind of come around here.
I think those are really good points. Definitely videos is a powerful tool to use, especially on social media. I'm going to do our last question to Katelyn, and then I'll open it up for Q&A. What conversations are happening on the East Coast of Canada with young professionals when they look at BC? Does it drive a little bit of anxiety? Is there a fear that that's going to spread over to the East Coast? Are you seeing that? Or are people feeling pretty good about where they are?
We aren't feeling good about what we're seeing on the West Coast, obviously, with what's happening with the salmon farming sector. However, with what's happening on the East Coast is literally completely night and day than what's happening on the West Coast. So to explain that a little bit more, here on the East Coast, Newfoundland just successfully terminated the MOU for the National Marine Conservation Area put forward by Parks Canada. Nova Scotia just got accepted in their Liverpool area to have site expansion. So it's literally the opposite of what is happening on the West Coast here on the East Coast. So how we're feeling, we feel very unfortunate, and it's tragic what's happening on the West Coast. I would say we're feeling a little optimistic about what's happening on the East Coast, though. So it's really it's conflicting. It's a really conflicting feeling, and I think it has a lot to do with how it's regulated because we're provincial and you guys are more federal on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are regulated differently, which is, in my opinion, a little crazy considering we're the same country. But no, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. So I know we're running really tight on time, so anyone that can stay a little bit later, I'll try to answer as many questions as we can. I'm going to start with the first one here. James, how does the industry or the public deal with social media, which to a large extent is so easily manipulated in terms of reach and volume and has no quality control? I've given up on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, as most of it, in my opinion, is to use phrase fake news, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. We're in an era of fake news and misinformation. That's not going anywhere, and it's only getting worse with AI, as I'm sure all of you see all the time. What I believe is coming from this, right, is authenticity and storytelling are really going to be the crux of this in years to come. You can't trust just infographics or just pages about this, that, and the other. What you can trust is somebody that you've seen their face for years. They're accredited. They're probably on LinkedIn. They're a human being, right? That is accountable to what they're doing and saying. Maybe they have accreditations or degrees in what they're talking about, and that really that shift is ongoing right now. More people turn to a dozen nutritionists online for dietary advice than they do the American Medical Board. And that's kind of true across the board here. So yeah, I mean, these platforms are absolutely rife with misinformation, fake news, and the likes because it generates clicks. It's a good moneymaker, right? I like to view anti-aquaculture as a bit of a money-making machine. It absolutely is, right? When I was starting out doing this, it would have been far more lucrative and much quicker to make money had I just bashed aquaculture for quick, views and engagement. And that still rings true today, right? For anybody who's going to go online, if you make money by the click, it's easy to just spew whatever you want if you're not accountable, right? So that's why the human piece to it is the most important here. And I think AI is really going to push that along. I don't know about you guys, but every time I see something written by AI or that is AI imagery, I'm done. It's over. If you couldn't be bothered to write it or take the picture, why should I bother to read it? And I think that's a largely, unanimous sentiment with Gen Z. So, having a human being behind this kind of stuff is really going to matter. We're not going to lose TikTok, Instagram, Facebook delights. We're only going to get more of them, right? It consumes everybody's time. It's overtaken television time for millennials and under. Whether or not that's a good thing, that's another conversation, but it's where we are today. So, utilizing these platforms as best we can, putting a human behind it, that's people can trust. That is the best way to do it, in my opinion.
I think those are great points. And while we're on the topic of social media, we have another question, and this can go for any of the panelists that would like to answer. What are your thoughts on responding to those negative comments on social media posts? Should we fuel their fire, ignore, or delete those comments? You don't want to have their comments be the main focus, but if you delete or hide them, you're seen as ignoring their voices. This is something actually that we're experiencing quite heavily on the BC Salmon Farmers pages at the moment. It's almost like there's a coordinated attack happening from activists where you're just getting bombarded with negative comments. And while there's one hand that, the engagement helps boost your posts and helps people see it, the other hand is you don't want people going to your comment section just seeing nothing but negative comments either. So what would any of your panelists, what would you recommend organizations do if they're experiencing something like this? Sorry, James, maybe.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Oh, sorry.
Sure, I'll be quick. I had 17,000 comments last year, right? I deleted a couple hundred and I hid probably a couple hundred. When it's vulgar, when it's attacking somebody specifically, it has no place online. I'm accountable to my own comment section, as the companies are who put out videos, right? So treat it that way. If there's stuff in there that is just blatant misinformation, it's not a question. They may be phrased as questions, but they're not. Or if it's coordinated attacks. I've woken up to like 3,000 comments in one day that are all in like Spanish. I'm like, okay, well, now I need to go translate all these, right? There are coordinated attacks like this that come out, and they're pretty easy to buy. Those are all paid for things. It's a couple of grand and it will just flood an account. It's especially in AI, you can just do it in 5 minutes. So yeah, don't judge comments as like a representative sample of your viewership. When was the last time you commented on a random video on an industry or subject that you really aren't familiar with? It's probably relatively infrequent, if ever. So it is not a representative sample. I would say, leave it as open discourse unless there's something that is genuinely, problematic. If they're cursing at you, if they're calling out people by name, that's my strategy.
That's some good advice, Katelyn.
Also, I'll just stick to the facts. So if something that's been posted is just so blatantly, obviously wrong, not scientifically true, I'll go to a research article that's, been published in a scientific journal. I'll cite it, put the link there, and I'll just leave it at that. And then other times it's not like on the negative side, but I've been consciously trying to love, uplift, positive information in the aquaculture realm. I don't think it kind of gets the likes that it deserves. And when it comes to like search engine optimization and all that stuff and metadata, it all depends on like how you are being interacted with it. Like you said, Michelle, you want the post to go up. So do you leave the comments? I would leave the comments, but I would also encourage young people to start engaging positively with other scientific facts and things like that to bring them up higher in the search engine optimization bar.
Also good advice. Brian, I see your mic's off.
Yeah. Further to Katelyn, what I've, and I will say that myself, I always, maybe it's my age, I always want to respond, and I want to respond with science. Or my latest one now is saying, well, where did you get that information? But the reality is, I think a lot of those comments are almost like a form of bullying. That they're just trying to, to get engagement. But what I've really noticed with the, and this is compliments to the sort of the younger Gen Z, they're taking over the industry, quickly taking over the industry is we see positive ratioing where people are not letting it go by, and we're seeing lots of likes and from people in the sector, comments on the sector, and support for the people that are making those. And I really noticed in observing, our local issues that as more people do that, people feel more empowered to make positive comments, to put that on their personal Instagram. And so I think we all collectively have a role to support those who are sort of putting themselves out there and saying, and a very good example of that is, the BC young salmon farmers who, we have veterinarians and people out in the farms posting how cool their job is, right? And and then standing by the ones that are doing, others standing by them as when they have people try and, dump all over them for it. So that, I think, we all sort of have a collective responsibility to support each other across the sector.
I think that's great. And I'll have one last question here because I know we're over time already. How can we empower those of us who are excited for the future of aquaculture to share our experiences and enthusiasm? Joana?
Well, I can say something. I guess, yeah, we just said it in this webinar. We need to support each other. We know we know of each other, so we just need to continue that. Those connections. And I think with the younger generation, really, I think it's the industry, the current leaders really need to bring them to the table. So they can be supported in this, they can have a say in decision making, because in 10, 20 years they will be the leaders in aquaculture and will be held accountable for what the decisions we make today. So I think it's really important that the leaders of today really empower the young people today. Yeah,
I think that's great. Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. As I stated, we are over time. I wanted to once again extend my thanks to Imperial 75 by Cargill for sponsoring this webinar today, as well as Aquaculture North America and the Next Generation Seafood Alliance for hosting this webinar series. Additionally, I'd like to give a big thank you to our panelists today for their insights. I know I personally have learned a lot, and I hope you all have as well. Finally, I would like to extend a big thank you to our audience and for your questions and participation. Please watch your inboxes for a link of the recording as well as the survey as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.